I'm just going to quickly be drawing some notes here. What I'll do is I'll try to share a PDF of this later as well, if that's useful. But the idea of the sovereign creator, some of you might know this, but it comes from this book, right? This is probably the most classic, most well-known book in the crypto community, right? It's called The Sovereign Individual. Quick chats in the chats. Has anybody read this book? You can just tell me. I'll pop the chat out here as well. Has anyone read The Sovereign Individual? So, a bit about Sovereign Individual. It is not a very recent book. It actually came out before the dot com boom. So, it was actually in the late 90s. However, this one book has been so influential in a lot of thinking around decentralization today that this is literally considered like a Bible when it comes to decentralization. So with sovereign, so a lot of the ideas here, not original ideas that I'm sharing. I'm sort of pulling it from this book. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to recontextualize. Right, the book was written in the 90s. Every single page of that book could be its own book. Right, that book is dense. But what I'm going to talk about is recontextualizing some of those ideas and say how do they apply to us. And by us, I mean people who are creators or people who are figuring out remote work and building a life on the internet. So the basic premise of the book, this you'll get it even if you just read the Amazon description, is that we were in the industrial age at one point, right? Which is even before the industrial age, if you think about it, when things were mostly tribes or smaller cities or dwellings, when there was a neighboring village would plunder your village, steal all your gold, which is all your resources, and get massive profit, right? It was a very material living. The industrial revolution took the concept of taking materials and using that to fuel growth. So whether that means new factories, new methods of production, new types of goods, which is like cars, automobiles, consumer goods. However, we've made a shift. We've moved from the industrial age, which was a big defining moment, to the information age. Now you might be thinking like, yo, this sounds, yeah, I mean, makes sense, but haven't we been in the information age forever? Like we've been working in tech for a very long time now. IT companies in India have been doing massive projects globally, in the 90s itself. However, what's different now? What's different now is that the information age is getting to a point where it's becoming mainstream, where it's becoming consumer. So the thing with decentralization, the thing to understand is that for there to be decentralization, it always starts with centralization. So for example, if you talk about Bitcoin, the banks and everything are centralized, right? So for us to reach a point of decentralization, centralization has to exist first. So with the information age as well, it's been around forever. However, it's been centralized mostly to corporations, which is as a developer, let's say, or as a remote worker. Let's say you're making 30 lakhs per annum 5 years ago. You probably couldn't back then make that same 30 lakhs per annum being the developer, but without the company. So your role was defined by the role of the structure that you were in, the corporation. And that is an example of centralization, right? What we're going from is the decentralization of corporations to sovereign creators. Now, I'll draw a few more parallels to help understand this idea, right? So we went from money, which is decentralization of um, the central banks which control everything, to Bitcoin. And now, of course, I'm not saying that, oh, the world has changed. I'm just saying these are trends that are happening. You can observe them and you can see how they play out. With a lot of banks, so not just money, but banks, you have DeFi, which has new protocols coming out, right? Decentralized finance. And in some way, the media has been decentralized by the internet, which is before to have an audience of, let's say, 1,000 people. You couldn't do that as an individual. Why? Because distribution was limited, right? Which is if you, let's say, in 2001 decided that, hey, I want to have an audience of 1,000 people, how would you do it? You'd have to distribute flyers, or have phone numbers, and then call them up and say, hey, I have a tweet, can I tell you this thing about sovereign creator? And there was no distribution channels. Today, the number of views I get on my YouTube is equivalent to what a lot of local TV stations get, right? On prime time. A lot of people you would be surprised that with just Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, what has happened is not really that media has been replaced, but the power which was centralized, which is the power to own the narrative, to have people and send them your ideas, has now been decentralized. Every single person can do that. A kid today can open Instagram stories and share to thousands of people. That was never possible before. So that is a decentralization of media as well. So why this is relevant today is also because of the big elephant in the room. Literally 2019, when somebody says, hey, you're working remotely, they would be like, yo, that's so weird, I've never heard of that. How do you do it? Bore nahi hote ghar pe? 2020, everybody is working remote, right? So from something which is a niche activity, we've gone from that being the mainstream, right? So in the same way that Bitcoin back in 2011 was a niche activity, right? A handful of people who knew what it was. To now, one Bitcoin has crossed $30,000, right? So many people are in that ecosystem. So with COVID, remote has become mainstream to a point where most people have experienced remote, right? It's no longer this niche activity that some, eccentric guys who don't want to sit in the office are doing. Everybody's doing it. And we've got to a point where people are realizing that, hey, this remote thing is actually working. Not just individuals, but companies are realizing, hey, there's massive costs that we can offset. And to do that, all we have to do is just get better with our processes, just get better with our channels of communication. A lot of companies in the US are also realizing, you know, that, hey, we can actually hire employees globally now. If all our employees are going to be global, why hire somebody who lives within a 5 kilometer radius? Always been the case, but it's been niche. That's becoming a little bit more mainstream. So this tweet that I put out, I don't want to claim like authority for anything, but in general, the things that I'm thinking about is number one, let me, so the basic thesis is that a sovereign creator has the ability to explore passion projects, right? Whether that's a side hustle, whether that's even a hobby that's not a side hustle, or it's actually a business that you're running on the side. You have the opportunity to explore it right now. A sovereign creator aspires for multiple sources of income. Freelancers, we know this already. But a lot of people who are working remote right now haven't even considered the fact that I could have more than one source of income. The fact that my salary is not going to be the only source of income. Number three is remote or partially remote. Which is most people might have actually gotten a bad experience of remote work with the last year. Why? Because they were forced to do it. They had to just do some jugaad and put stuff together. Their companies probably overworked them because there were no processes in place, so there was more work happening. However, there will be that balance that will be reached. We will reach that equilibrium where companies are like, okay, we have figured it out now. Things are a little bit more smoother. And we're not going to say it's 100% remote because people still miss meeting up with colleagues. So we're going to maybe make it partially remote. So you come into we either do retreats every couple of months, you come in on a certain day of the week, or, not at all. And finally, the ability to design your own lifestyle. Freelancers have always known this, right? I'm sure in the remote Indian community as well, there's photos of some of you sitting in Goa right now, right? There's photos of people sitting in the mountains, sipping chai, doing other activities as well. And the idea is that is not something that only a few people can have. Everybody can have that. The point is, for some reason, we have designed our life around work. And that's been the default for most of the world. However, with this experience of working remote, a lot of people have realized that, hey, you know, like I know somebody, and this is not just freelancers, like I know somebody who is a senior designer at PhonePe. Now, PhonePe, I never assumed, obviously, that they would work remote. They're a very standard company with Flipkart's culture. However, he's been working in Goa for 3 months because of the pandemic. And he doesn't want to go back. Of course, he doesn't want to go back. He's in Goa, right? He doesn't want to go sit at Sony Signal, sit in Koramangala traffic, talk about Koramangala things. When work has been going great, work has been going better than ever before. So we're realizing that we can actually design not our life around work, but work around our life, which means you don't have to take somebody else's version of what your life should be. You can actually design this. Now, so far, it might seem like, that sounds great, but practically, how the fuck? How do we do this? Right? What does it really take to be able to do this? And of course, what are the risks involved with this? So before the risks, let me now actually jump into how you can do this. Right? Um, I have a small favor, people in the chat. Can somebody pull up this article called "The Rise of the Full Stack Freelancer"? It'll be the first result on Google. This is by this guy, Tiago Forte, who's the um, founder of Building a Second Brain, which is a cohort based course. But basically, how to navigate or how to set this up. Let me put it here. The idea is that, when actually, let's talk about the risks. Actually, what exactly is the risk of being something like this? And now I'm sure when a lot of you went remote, you had to justify this to someone in your life that, hey, remote is actually okay. Maybe your parents were like, office क्यों नहीं जा रहा है, घर पे क्यों बैठा हुआ है? And you have to justify to them that it's okay. It's not a risky move. So I want you to think about risks in this way. What are the risks of being a sovereign creator? I want you to think about what are the risks of not being a sovereign creator, right? Number one is your income stream can be cut at any point, right? If this is you and this is one source of income, this is your company that pays you, and suddenly this disappears, either because the company changes direction, they decide they no longer need you, or they decide that, hey, you know, whatever reason, sorry, we tried our best, but you're out. What happens at this point is you are like, whoa, you enter a mode of panic because suddenly you have zero sources of income and all you have are your savings at this point. However, and then what you do is you try to find another. However, if you have other sources of income. And now I'll talk about what some of those are as well. But let's say you have a little bit of freelance that you've been doing on the side. You have, let's say, a small software product that you've created that has a few paying customers. Let's say you have a community just like this one. You've set up a paid community. Let's say you have courses, or let's just call them info products. It could be courses, ebooks, or let's say you have consulting as well. So then the equation sort of changes. So it's no longer then about how do I find the next source of income that replaces the one that I just lost. It becomes how do I redistribute my portfolio. What does that mean? Is that if you ever do lose your job, the way you would think about it is not how do I immediately get a new job. That is how your parents would think about it, though. Why? Because the kind of world that they have lived in is you take one job, you work that till retirement, right? It was all so. Since this was the default, anybody who was doing something else, which is leaving a job in 2 months, there was a taboo associated with it. Like something must have gone wrong, right? Kya kya jamla ho gaya? What did you say to your boss? And the point is, like most people don't stay at a company for more than 2 years. It's actually a bad signal if you stay in a company for too long, because it means you don't care about your growth. You're getting complacent, right? Um, so when we talk about risk, think about what are the risks of not being a sovereign creator. And now you don't need to make that a part of your identity, right? You don't have to adopt all of this. It's just whatever works for you in the moment. Number two is you can get cancelled at any point, right? Getting getting fired is a form of cancellation, but you can't, for example, get deplatformed, which is what a lot of creators today have been seeing. The bigger ones, not us, but the bigger ones. Number three is, of course, this idea of designing life around work, right? What toll would that play if the rest of your life was designed around work, right? Which is somebody else is deciding that you have to go into this office for these many hours. And I'm not saying that's wrong. That might be the right thing for you right now. But you have an opportunity right now. If you want to change it, you really can. Finally, this one is kind of obvious, but do you always want to work with local talent? Do you only want to work with the people who are in your city? Right? If you're in Bangalore right now, do you only want to work with the Bangalore people? Right? There is a lot to learn out there, and that is one of the risks associated with not actually becoming a sovereign creator. So let's take a small 5-minute break. I want to see some chats. We'll maybe answer a few questions. And then finally, the last part of the session, I just want to talk a little bit about how do you actually become a Navi? How do you actually become a sovereign creator?
Cool, man. Abhinav, this is pretty interesting. I hope the rest of the members are also, finding this to be a lot of value. So one of the questions which, I wanted to maybe ask and is that you left like a rocket ship, which is
Yeah.
Unacademy. It was, something which could only, like grown. So what was the thought process which, went in making the decision to focus fully on
Yeah.
and I'm sure that you're not fully like there are other revenue streams for you, so it's not
Yeah.
necessarily just 10K designers which is bringing in the money, but that's very interesting decision, and that could give us some uh,
Yeah.
context as well. Yeah.
Definitely. So with Unacademy, I was there for 2.5 years. So of course I have that. Let's call it income stream coming in. Also a significant amount of ESOPs, which I'll, so I did leave like 2 years of ESOPs on the table. I was there for 2 years, so that's what I vested. That was around also the time when I started UI sources, which doesn't make that much money. It made about 10,000 or $11,000 in 2020. Um, and then roughly these were my income sources at that point, right? My main reason for leaving Unacademy is, again, whenever I think about the risk associated with something, my default is to go to what's the risk of not doing it, right? Which is the risk of leaving Unacademy is that I'll have to set something up which pays me as much as Unacademy does. And let me just tell you, like heads of design make a lot because there's very few of them in the industry. There's very few design leaders in the industry. But the risk of staying at Unacademy and not doing my own thing was that I just become, I just keep sort of climbing this corporate ladder of design this thing, design director, do this more thing. And the point is, I don't want to be a manager. Also, I don't want to be a designer, right? Although design has sort of been my main identity for the longest time now, close to 8 years, I find that limiting. I don't want to just look at myself as a designer. I want to look at myself as somebody who can use design to do anything that I want, whether that's designing a business, designing a lifestyle, designing products, designing communities, anything. And personally, working at a company is at some point or most of the time a specialist role, which is great because they pay you exactly for what you're bringing to the table. But otherwise, you don't. So, short, long answer short, 2 years of equity that I received, the ESOPs, were good enough for me. I knew that the risk I was taking was letting go of these things which are today worth crores because Unacademy is a unicorn, right? However, I'm okay with that because that for me is now the fuel to actually make 10K designers much bigger because now I know what I've left on the table. Yeah.
And I think I've came across this term called a time billionaire or something. I'm not sure if people in the audience have also seen them in their Twitter feeds. So in that sense, like we always like to become billionaires in terms of money. Like that's something which gives us a lot of status, a lot of joy. But having something which it almost seems like play to you, like I would believe 10K designers is something which is almost like doesn't seem like work, right?
Yeah.
So having that quality is very difficult to measure, but I feel
Yeah.
there's a lot of merit in it.
I mean, that is true. But I don't see it as so, it doesn't feel like work, but it also doesn't feel like play. To me, it feels like a sport. The
Okay.
reason for that is in play, you don't really have a defined outcome. With sport, what you're trying to do is, of course, win the current game that you're playing, but improve yourself such that your stats increase over time and that your team gets better. And now, when you play the role of a coach, then you're making sure your team is leveling up as well. And that's how you become a high performance sports team. So that's sort of how I look at it.
Very well said. I think that distinction between play and sport, that's
Yeah.
pretty nice. So do we want to
Yeah. Let's
keep
jump back
going,
in.
or should we?
Let's jump
Yep.
back in. I
And
have like a
we'll
small piece to cover, which is like the,
sure.
I mean, now all of you have the context around it. Now I'm going to get a little more practical and say, how do you actually do this? So the required reading for all of you, if you stuck along this far, it means you're interested, is that link above, Forte Labs, the rise of the full stack freelancer. But basically, full stack freelancer for him is a term which is a freelancer who has multiple sources of income. And now you balance this like you do your portfolio. And what you just said, Abhishek, about time, perfect segue, right? Because the two things that you have that are going to be your biggest resource are time and information, which is with freelancing, you are selling your time, right? So let's say you have 40 hours of work in a week. You're selling it for, let's say, $50 an hour. You're making a certain amount of money because of that. But then the minute you want to grow like this exponentially, you can't because you have a limited amount of time. However, you can offset that by not selling time, but selling information instead. Why? Because information can scale. At a time, you can have maybe one or two clients, or if you're really heavy about it, three or four clients. But you can't have 300 to 400 clients, right? With freelancing, you can do this with information. And since there's a lot of developers in this community, let me add a third category. You can do this with software. Scaling something from 3 to 4 to 300 to 400, you might not even need to upgrade your servers. It might just be the exact same thing. Versus freelancing, it's a totally different ballgame. You would have to get offices with 3 floors to be able to scale to that level, right? You would have to set up an agency. So what I want you to think about is these 3 buckets, right? And you're going to sell some time, you're going to sell information, you might sell software, right? And with information, I want you to think about this. You might think, who is going to pay me for information, right? Let's say you are a front-end developer and maybe your expertise is in React. You obviously know who the experts in React are. You look up to them and you're like, why would they pay me when that person exists? But a small mindset shift there that might be useful is that, how in the beginning we talked about industrial and information age. The information age is actually over. The age we're in now is information abundance. There is an overflow of information, more information than we know what to do with, right? You go to Twitter, you go to Instagram, everybody has some mission and quest that they're on that they're tweeting about all the time. You go to Medium, there's 100 articles on the exact same topic, probably thousands, right? Anything that, if you're ever considering writing a blog post about how you did something, you go to Google and that's the best way to kill your interest because you see thousands already and they're already doing really well. But keep this in mind, we're at a stage of information abundance, which is people have more information now that they know how to do it. And in the industrial age, we were at a place of information scarcity, which is the reason universities were such a big deal, was because who else but universities had that density of information in one place without the internet, right? Let's say without the internet, you wanted to learn about law. You can't go learn it from one person. You have to go to the place where all this information has been gathered. So it's almost like these universities were the sort of ones who held information, and you would go there and they would give you some of their information. Now we've reached a point of abundance. Universities don't have a monopoly on information anymore. However, there's also abundance. What people are now looking for is not information alone, right? They're looking for the right information from the right person from for them, right? All 3 of these are super important, which is they don't just want the right information, which is, if you Google how to start a business, you're not going to find the best ways of starting a business. You're going to find the article with the best SEO, right? Those articles that you see on the first page of Google, they're not written for humans. They're written for robots. They're written for SEO. So the best information out there is actually not on Google. So people are looking for the right info. They're looking for it from the right person, which is all this thing that I'm talking about. You could piece it together from the sovereign individual. Just read the book. But the point is, for me to bring this information to you in this live session is very different from reading the book. You would connect with that information a lot more if I shared it, because we share something in common, right? All of us, we've been in the tech industry in some way. We're roughly working in software, in products, in design. We're all Indian, for example. We know that there's some shared connection there. And then finally, it's for them, which is a book is written to everybody, right? Here, this message or this thing that I'm delivering, this information to you, I'm doing it in a way that it's for you, not for the general audience. That poll we ran in the beginning, that is the person we're making this for. So keep this in mind that whenever you think, it's been done already, it's not. Because there are people out there looking for the right information from the right person, which is for them. So the mindset, if I had to like just sort of summarize, is imagine all your info. And now when I say info, I'm talking about the knowledge that you have, right? This could be technical knowledge. It could be your experience, which is, only you know how it's like to work at the company you are at. That is your experience. Nobody else has that. Imagine all your info is raw gold. And why I say raw is because it's not processed. It's all there. You've had these experiences. You have a lot of knowledge, but it's all raw. What you want to do is figure out how do you create an offer. This is where thinking of yourself not as a designer, developer, or a specific thing helps. Because technically, creating an offer is what a marketer would do. But this is something that we have to figure out ourselves now. How do you take this gold that you have? Imagine you just have this tijori full of gold. How do you create an offer which is not saying this is what I have, finding out what do people want? For me, I can give you one example. When I actually quit Unacademy, my goal was actually to start UI sources and go bigger with it. UI sources at that point, when it was ad supported, it was making about $50 a month. When I changed it to a subscription, it made $4,000 in the first month. Right? My goal was actually to scale UI sources. But what I realized is my community, which is the Discord that I have of designers and creators, which is about 3K members right now, not a single person from there bought UI sources. And that was a revelation for me. Why? Because I was creating an offer based on what I had, not based on what people wanted. And when I asked them, what do you want? They said, I want an end-to-end design course. Just teach me design. So then I had to package the information I have in a different way. So it's creating an offer. Number two is then figuring out how do you package it, right? So if people say, I want to learn design, I could have definitely made a YouTube playlist. And I did. On my channel, I have a playlist called Crash Course in Design, which will teach you everything about design if you really want to do it. However, you have to package it in a way that is right for them, right? These things here. So you can definitely then make an ebook if you would like, if you think that's the one that's right for them. Or you can do a cohort-based course, which is what I'm doing right now, which is it's a 3-month course with a limited number of people. And at the end of it, this is what you will get, which is an internship or a job. Right? So you have to package it in a way that is right for them. And finally, you have to sell it. One of the big weaknesses that I have, and I've tried to overcome, and I'm pretty sure most of you have as well. It's a weakness. Let me just say that upfront. Is that we're scared to ask for money. Right? I'm sure some of you have overcome it in some way. But you as a developer, you're like, why will I pay $5 per month for this? It'll take me only one weekend to make it. Right? You might think that way. But the weakness is that you think everybody thinks that way as well, which stops you from charging. This point is around monetization. You need to monetize as early as possible. And the reason for that is simply that, free is not sustainable. If you really want to become this person who is a sovereign creator with individual, um, you know, multiple sources of income, you can't wait till you're an expert. Because people actually don't want to hear from experts. They want to hear from the right person for them. So think about it. This is how you do it. Some examples of this, this is my final point for today's session. Freelancing is one example, which is you are creating an offer. I will make a React app for you. I will make a design. I will make the first MVP for you. You're packaging it. It'll take 2 months. This is how we will work. You will pay me hourly. And then you're selling it. You're saying, let's start working on this project. This is my contract. This is how we do it. Consulting is another. The main difference being you're telling people what needs to be done, but you're not actually doing it. So let me give you an example. For me, like let's say I've been head of design. There's a lot of companies who want to figure out how do we actually hire designers? How do we build a design team? Right? Like for example, Swiggy has amazing designers. They don't need me to tell them how to hire designers or build a team. But there's hundreds of companies that are not Swiggy that don't have these celebrity designers with hundreds, thousands of followers on Twitter or whatever, who want good design. Nobody says I want bad design, but they really can't afford to hire like the best designers, or they just don't know how to do it. Right? So that is consulting, which is helping companies figure something out. For you, if you, let's say you're a developer, it might be something around platform architecture. Let's say, how do you set that up? It could also be around hiring, which is how should your company hire? How should you promote developers? Right? Think of your past experiences. Right? All your info is gold. You could also think of, now this is another space that I'm investing heavily in for the next for this year. You could think of collabs, which is the fact that earlier all your collaborators were fellow employees is also getting decentralized, which is we're going to see a lot more collaborations between creators, programmers, designers, where you build a product together. You let's say it's an information product, you sell it, split the revenue, and then you go about your own way. You end up working on your own projects. Or let's say if you're doing a cohort based course, you do it for 3 months, but for the other 9 months, you're not really working on something. So time sensitive, like limited collabs with other creators, whether it's, putting together a software product, putting together even let's say if you, like, since you're all remote workers, putting together a retreat in Goa for remote workers, right? All you have to do is just come here. We take care of your housing. We take care of your food. Stay here for a month and then go back, right? That could be a source of income for you. It could be a way to create that whole community that is missing once you start going remote. And it doesn't need to be a full time job. It's something that you can collaborate with some people and then you all go back to your individual stuff. So collabs are a big this thing there. And finally, the last thing I'll just say is info products. Information products come in hundreds of sizes and shapes, right? I'll give a very simple example. UI sources. What is UI sources? It's it's about 800 videos that I've recorded on my phone, right, of different apps that I've used. So it's about 800 small video clips and about 2,500 screenshots. And I am selling this for $29 for 3 months, $99 for 12 months. That's an example of an information product. It's not even my information. It's just I'm a curator at this point. So that's it for my session. We'll jump into some questions now. But yeah, thank you all for being here.
And so much value in this past 40 minutes or so.
Thank you.
So
Thanks.
I hope, guys, you have some questions here. We would love to take them up as we are closing the hour. And I see one question from Vids. Maybe we want to
Yeah, I'll answer that.
take that up.
Yeah. So Vid's question is, when you said that moving from a company within 2 years is bad signal on growth, can you explain more on that? Okay.
Let me.
The answer.
Yeah.
Okay. The answer to this is, think about this. Um, our default assumption is if you look at a LinkedIn and somebody's been at a company for 1 year, 2 years, 1 year, 2 years, you're like, oh, this person keeps jumping companies. It's probably something wrong with them. But a lot of companies today, now this I don't want to give a generic answer, so I'll say it's not always true. But a lot of companies look at it as, is this person investing in their growth? So I'll give you one example. When we were hiring designers for Unacademy, and we saw that somebody has been at let's say let's say Zoho, right? I'm just taking a random example, for 7 years. What does that tell me about that person? It tells me that of course Zoho must be a great company, no doubt. But it also tells me that, hey, like, 7 years, like, I'm sure, like, just being in the startup industry, that if you're a good designer or a good whatever, there is a demand for you. So either you've been ignoring those opportunities because Zoho is so good, or you don't have those opportunities, which means you're not actually that good. You're just in that job because you think you can't get another. So it's a signal. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying this is how all employees treated, but staying at a company for too long means that you either don't have better opportunities for growth or you don't care about growth. You are okay just sitting in a company and doing work, which not a bad thing, by the way. But yeah, that's just a little bit of clarification on that.
Yeah. And if I may add, Abhinav, I'd like to maybe, mention this point as well, that as we are seeing this, cyber economy growing, I think it's so much more important to put out the work that we're doing. Like build in public is obviously, something which is popular among creators and things like that. But even for, programmers or designers, I think a Dribble portfolio or a GitHub portfolio adds so much more, relevance or signal, as you mentioned, than a resume where you just mentioned that, hey, this is where I worked for the last 7
100%.
years.
Definitely. Definitely. And one point I want to add that I actually should have covered, I didn't, is that let me just quickly bring up the screen share again, because this is actually not to be missed. I would be doing you guys a disservice if I didn't tell you this. We talked about how you have to first break into this mindset of, what you have is actually valuable. Think about right info for the right person. Then you have to, of course, create an offer, package it, and sell it. The final point here that actually ties all of this together is that you need to own your own distribution channels. What does that mean? It means that you need to, on your own, be responsible for growing it. You need to have your own audience. Now, a distribution channel can be on a certain platform. So let me just write platform. It could be something like your Twitter, your LinkedIn, your, let's say, even Clubhouse. What this is that these are rented platforms, which is if Twitter bans you, all those followers are gone. But it's still valuable in the sense that people who follow you on these platforms want to know what you're working on. They're interested in that. So if you create an offer and package it for them, very likely that getting your first few customers or um, let's just call them users will be very simple. But beyond that, you also want to, for the longer term, invest in your own platforms, which is, I don't just mean a tech platform, right? You don't really have to build your own tech for it. It could also just mean an email list because you own this database. Nobody can take an email list away from you. It could even mean phone numbers, right? Let's say if you're doing a WhatsApp thing instead of email, because maybe that's better in India. So these distribution channels are super important because today you might be working on one product, right? 5 years later, let's say you decide to work on a totally different product. You don't want to start all over again in building an audience. Ideally, you want the audience that was here for this product to have grown. And now, since they're sort of interested in you, maybe they're interested in your product as well because it's in the similar space. So you don't want to start all over again. So distribution channels, and this sort of answers Praveen's question as well. Um, Top distribution channels or strategy for information products in early stage. Um, he has a niche course 10 email list already. That's perfect, right? You have your email list. You need to figure out how do you create an offer for them? What's your messaging around that? How do you package it? And how do you sell it? And once you do that, then you can also, of course, experiment, which is I can't tell you Clubhouse is best. I can't even tell you Twitter is best, although it's been around for so long. Is it the best for you? That is something you would have to experiment and try out.
Cool. So I am taking up Azhar's question next, which
Yeah.
is how would you, explore this in midlife after being in corporate life for more than 10 years? Like, how would you, unlearn some of the habits or some of the things that you have picked up
Yeah.
on this
So,
journey?
Azhar, I would say you're already in the right place. The answer is small communities like this one, like Remote Indian. Or let's say if you wanted to get into design, 10K designers. Or let's say get into business, something like Stoa School, which is another cohort based program, right? What these communities do is not just teach you the information. This information is there on YouTube, right? You'll find Harvard's lectures on Coursera, but they give you the network, right? In your parents' time, the only way you could do this was an MBA. Today, if you get an MBA, you're just delaying the decision, right? So try to find these communities that can help you, understand what's going on right now. Because if you've been in the corporate world, it's not that it's bad. It's just that you might be disconnected from this other thing that's happening, right? So you want to try to find these smaller communities, get involved with them, and that will just open up the possibilities in your mind.
Yeah, I think it's like this is where the power of internet comes to the fore, that you can DM somebody who is who was totally unrelated to you, and you can like, what's the downside in it, right?
Yeah, and
And it's the same
that
thing with, yeah,
that's how
I
Abhishek
mean,
and I connected, by the way, right? It's not that he messaged me saying, "Yo, can you do this session?" We spoke
mm,
sometime last year about something else totally, you know, not even that active, like few messages every now and then.
mm,
But this is how you build relationships.
right. And I would believe it's the same with hanging out in these online communities like Reddit. Like,
Yeah,
obviously GameStop is like something which a lot of people have come across, and that's like a prime example of how things are changing. And uh, it's like you are either evolve with this change that is happening, or you will have to kind of fight, which is something which I think the book goes into quite a lot of detail, and that's something which
yeah,
is outside the scope of today's session, but
mm,
we'll leave it there.
yeah. So thank you all for joining. Um, if there's any insights from this, please share on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. I would love to check those out. I want to see what connected with you the most out of all the stuff. Um, I this is of course not a I'm not an expert on this, but this is something that I'm sort of figuring out myself as well. So if you want more of this kind of stuff, I do share a bunch of it on Twitter.
Yeah.
So feel free to DM me. If there's something you would like to discuss, something that you liked. I usually try to answer all my DMs.
Yeah. So I just want to mention Shubrank and Param. I just answered their question saying that please, DM them. So they had some questions which were outside the scope of today's session.
Awesome.
But this was amazing, man. I'm like so grateful for your time and doing this. And
Definitely.
I'm
My
sure
pleasure.
this is something which is outside the comfort zone for the community as well. We generally talk more strategy or more tactical kind of stuff, and this is, I would say, a big picture idea. And the reason I wanted to do this is that this is a difficult path, as in like working remotely or being a creator is a difficult path. And when the going gets tough, I think some philosophy or some big picture idea, helps us stay motivated enough so that we can, just survive the dip and keep going on.
Yeah. And in the end, it's all about people. There's other people who are on very similar journeys to yours. Um, so whenever you're feeling stuck, know that there's other people doing it as well, and don't hesitate to reach out.